So neither of us have kids, right? But I thought it would be interesting to talk about how parenting is like good and bad parenting is affecting our society, right? And I'll just start by saying that um, good parenting, what I believe good parenting is a parent that um, shows support, guidance, but at the same time is setting specific and good, healthy boundaries in order for their children to essentially mature and grow into producing adults, right? Like productive adults who also are producing. And I believe that many of our societal issues uh, could be reduced if parents just put a little bit more effort into parenting. And that's sort of my take. And I just kind of want to isolate this to begin with, because obviously there's so many other societal factors like social economic status and where you live. And there's so many environmental factors, but I just want to kind of isolate just for at the beginning here, why I think parents play such a large role in sort of shaping the younger generations coming up, and how good parenting could essentially reduce many of our societal issues. What's your take on that?
Yeah, definitely. I just I think we need to define how are you defining good parenting?
Okay. A parent that sufficiently supports, guides, and has proper boundaries for their child. That's sort of like my somewhat loose definition. Do you kind of want to go into each one and take apart each one by one?
We definitely can. The thing I'm thinking at, like, it's this. There's a weird thing with all of these, which is like chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
So it's like we were just talking off camera about this, but some parents, like people in general, right? Like are born into this world not really knowing anything to parents, and they can't necessarily pick or choose their parents, and so certain things might happen. Their parents might be or treat them in a certain way, or environmental circumstances might limit their ability to do certain things, etc. And so some people could just perpetuate, if they've had harm done to them in a young age or throughout their life, they might perpetuate that harm. But then other people seem to, become aware that was the case, and they decide not to perpetuate that harm or try to do things differently. And so I always think it like we talk about this a lot, but it comes back to this, like, self-awareness, developing that self-awareness, and, developing levels of self-control and being able to like zoom in and zoom out on timescales and like understanding unintended consequences and all this other stuff. But I agree with you. Parents have an incredibly important role and can have an incredible impact, both positive and negative, on children and the development of the future generations. But it's a tough topic. There's a lot to like unpack with it. There's a lot to untangle with it all, because like it's this weird chicken or the egg. Like it can be a tough thing, and certain things tend to perpetuate, whereas sometimes luckily people can break that. So there's a common one is like children of alcoholics will either grow up to be alcoholics or never drink, kind of thing. And obviously there's that's two ends of the spectrum, and there's going to be a whole space in between that. But it's just interesting how you can have two kids in the same environment. One comes away not being an alcoholic, and the other one ends up becoming an alcoholic. So but I agree with you. I think what you're saying is right. I think we just need to be careful with the whole like good and bad and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I'd like to try and unpack as much of this as we can today, and then I also want to get into a take that I have. And I want to mention one other thing. Guys, if you didn't see our episode last week, we did an episode of The Power of the Pussy. Please go check it out. It's a really fun episode. Ruben started with a really good bit, and watch the whole thing because we got into some really funny stories. Ruben shared some really funny shit. So go check it out. Power of the Pussy episode from last week. And also don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like the video and share with your friends, because we're taking this seriously, and we really want to grow this channel, this podcast, for sure.
You shared the funniest story.
Yeah, you think I did? All right. Watch last week's episodes. Comment who had the funniest story.
Yeah, simp or inverse simp. That was hilarious. But no, yeah, good topic. So okay, with all this parenting stuff and everything else, like I agree, like with all of that, right? The big thing is, I think you don't need a high level of self-awareness, right? Like it's not necessary. Like, some people whose parents might not be very self-aware can still grow up and to be amazing people and do amazing things. But it definitely does help. And I think, the interesting thing about parenting is it doesn't actually start with the child. It starts with you. It starts with the parent. It starts with you as yourself, and trying to develop that self-awareness about things that, you might want to have done differently, or have had done differently or better for yourself. So like, with, how do I say it? It's a good way to say it. I think like a meta goal for parents, like a really good, very simple goal that parents, like, if all parents sort of adopted this, would be a lot better, is like, just try to set your kids up just a little bit better than what you were set up. You know what I mean? Like, if you can reflect back on your life and think like, what do you wish was done differently, or what might have been, have helped you, or led your life down a different path that you might have, really liked or enjoyed, or whatever. What can you do different for your children? Like, just how can you make the next generation just a bit better than what, and I know better's a weird word, but like, kind of get what I'm saying, a bit better than what you had, so to speak. Like, we can all build from that, and we're all going to be starting at different points. But if that's sort of like the meta goal, is to just be like, I feel like this was put onto me when I was a kid or whatever, and that, that had these sort of impacts. And so I wish that that's not the case for my child. I'm going to work to not make that the case for my child. I think that's like a very simple sort of heuristic that, like, if we all just adopted that, the place would be a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree. That would be certainly fantastic. And even before that, I feel like many parents are neglecting their children. I think just the simple thing of just paying attention, giving them love, and being interested in the things that they are doing, or taking an interest in things that they are interested in, goes such a long way, right? But when you see parents that utilize a TV or an iPad or a phone to sort of parent the children with, there's a saying people use when they do that. I can't remember what it is right now, but basically, even like that small little thing, putting a 5-year-old kid in front of a screen to babysit them, I think that's what it was, to babysit them, essentially might not be the best option. And it does sort of seem like insignificant, but I just think that parents, maybe it's a time factor because we were living such busy lifestyles. A long time ago, when we had more time, because the men would go to work, women would stay at home, generally speaking, there was sort of time to give to raising your kids. But I think now, the society that we live in, less time is spent actually paying attention to what your kid is doing. And I think that can come with a lot of different consequences. And this is just like a small thing, because we can talk about how, parents being abusive, parents being drug addicts, alcoholics, or parents just constantly arguing, the dad's out of the picture, the mom's out of the picture, right? Those are all huge factors. But even just simple things of just taking the time out of your day to ask your kid what they're doing, what they're up to, right? I think it's very, very important to let the child know that they are loved and that they are being taken care of. Because I think if a child starts noticing that the parents are really paying much attention, they're going to start doing things to try and get the attention of the parents. And a lot of the times those things end up being harmful to the child or to other people as well. And children don't have the maturity to realize that they are just trying to get the attention of somebody doing these sometimes horrendous acts. But that's basically what it is. Sometimes when you see a child acting out, it's because they just want attention that they're not receiving at home.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. So I just want to play devil's advocate a little bit with this. So you said like it's really important to, like pay attention and let the kid know that they're loved. Like, but what if the parent doesn't have capacity to love the child? Like what if, and again, you said like time as well and how we don't have as much time. Like to my knowledge, we still have 24 hours in a day. None of that's changed. But we are typically busier and slightly more distracted because, it's so much easier to be now. And, things are sort of designed in a way to gain our attention and to take our attention, which takes our attention from other things. You only have so much, you only have 100% attention. That makes sense. So I get it. But yeah, devil's advocate with this, right? So devil's advocate is what if they don't have the capacity to love? One, because they don't even love themselves, and I think, so this is my whole thing is I always think it comes back to you as the individual. And again, developing that self-awareness, looking at your life and being critical of the things that have happened, reflecting on that as well, being appreciative of other things that have happened, But another big part of this is, I believe a lot of this really we can just boil down to the ability to delay gratification. So you mentioned the babysitting the kid with the iPad and all that kind of stuff, right? Like that's easy in the moment, right? Because it solves the problem. The kids distract. Okay, the kid's not running around doing all this. They're not crying. They're on the iPad. How good is that? Okay, well that's good in the moment, but what are the long-term unintended consequences of that? And this is this sort of meta concept that permeates all of life for people, which is like your ability to delay gratification is very, very important, because if you just optimize for like in the moment ease and enjoyment, typically that leads to, not the greatest outcomes long term, right? And I like this saying, which is like, you either pay now or you pay later. And I feel like a bit of a broken record because I mention that all the time. But this is that same concept, and it really matters. Like you either deal with, pay attention to the child and deal with why they can't behave well or they're acting this way or whatever. And then that's painful in the moment. That takes your time and energy and all the rest of it. But essentially, you've got the ability to solve that then and there, and then you can build from that, right? But if you don't, and you just distract or get the iPad in front of them, all you're really doing is delaying that thing. You're just gonna pay for it later. And the craziest thing about paying later is you pay with interest, and it compounds like a motherfucker. It's seriously tough. And this isn't just isolated to low income or low socioeconomic people. Like I've actually worked with children or young adults, right? Children and teenagers and young adults from very wealthy families, right? Like incredibly wealthy families. Okay. And those children did exactly what you just said about acting out. Like the only way they could get their parents to really pay attention to them was by doing bad things. And it wasn't because they consciously knew that. They weren't like, I'm going to do this bad thing so that my parents pay attention to me. It was literally like they subconsciously learned that over time, because if they were just good and did whatever, their parents didn't really pay attention because they didn't have to, right? They could focus on their work and keep making their money and do all the rest of it. It was all good. It was only ever when they acted out did they have to then start paying attention. And then those kids sort of learned indirectly that like, okay, or they developed behaviors that led them to do really bad, I'm talking like one of the kids I worked with, man, he got busted. And he's a young kid, like 13 to 15 years old, right? Very wealthy family. He got busted with 10,000 ecstasy pills, right? And this is just one of his events. He's done many. Okay. And there's lots of other examples of these children. But like part of it was he just wanted his parents to notice and pay attention. Like you said, like it goes a long way. But because they were so busy, so focused on their careers and everything else, and also not necessarily understanding what it even means to be a parent. Like I think it's not really taught to people either. I think largely our education system was designed in a completely different era. And when we did, sort of had more tightly knit communities in that regard, like locally and in the physical space. And things are different now. And we know a lot more now. We know a lot more about development and community and care and love and all these and emotions too, even though it's not mainstream. There has been lots of progress made in this area. But yeah, it's there's so much in this. Like even just trying to address one point, I'm trying to be objective about it. And I realize that there's just so many different factors.
I think they say that the brain development of the child is most rapid between 0 and 5 years old, or between 2 and 5 years old. I don't remember exactly what it is, but I believe it's the range is upwards of something to 5 years old, where the personality is being developed. So those are sort of the crucial years, right? And if you are essentially using not social media, but if you're using a TV or you're using an iPad to sort of babysit those children, what you're sort of essentially teaching them bad habits, right? Because I think watching TV, watching a lot of movies, being on social media a lot it's sort of an addiction, right? And if the child is experiencing television at such a high volume at a young age, they're likely going to be addicted to TV or consuming social media in one way or another. And it's sort of giving them like open access, I suppose, to the world, right? Because kids these days, like it's kind of crazy. They understand, like a 5-year-old understands how to work an iPad. It's crazy. They understand how to download games. They understand how to search for videos. So you can only control so much. What happens when they, start searching for their own things, right? Because you're not always going to be there the whole time. And now you're basically teaching them how to access the world at a very, very young age. I've even seen parents give TikTok to their kids. I went to a grocery store the other day, and it's a private owned grocery store. It's like a little one. And so this is a real story. The kid was watching videos on TikTok, just scrolling, watching like just crazy, stupid shit. And the dad was there at the cashier, and the kid was just sitting like by the dad. So the dad saw that kid, what he was watching, but wasn't really paying attention. And I was there with my wife, and I mentioned to my wife, like, yo, like this kid's like 4 years old scrolling through TikTok, like watching the most absurd shit, like just stupid, mindless shit. And we actually ended up having a conversation with the dad because we kind of know him. We let him know, if you're going to hand your cell phone over to the kid to babysit him, at least put something on that is, better for him, right? So we were saying, is he learning English, for example? And no, he's not learning English. So my wife actually took the phone and she searched up an English learning channel on YouTube for kids, and then handed the phone back to the kid. I remember leaving feeling like, all right, like we let the dad know that letting the kid just scroll through TikTok is for sure a bad idea. But he didn't even realize it. He didn't even think about that, right? Even though he's seeing what his son is watching, it just didn't click with him that this was some sort of issue. So a lot of times I think parents just don't understand what is happening to the mind of a kid when they're just scrolling through social media platforms or just watching any type of show for hours on end, right?
Yeah. So to address that first thing, I got a couple of things I want to say there. That last thing you just said, the dad might not have known, and he might not have even thought about it because he might not even have the space the capacity, the time, the energy, any of those things to even think about it, right? Like he might be in such a position where he's just trying to get through each day, like he might be in over his head, so to speak, so that this all ties into it. I agree broadly that just letting a very young child scroll TikTok is probably not the greatest thing. And definitely, like being exposed to educational content is bad. So I just want to say, like, just being online or just being on TikTok or YouTube or whatever isn't inherently good or bad. It is what you make of it or what, the parent makes. So you can find many educational many valuable things to, to get your kids to consume, and teaching them to be able to access the internet and anything is incredibly powerful. But with any great power comes, sort of great responsibility, but it's also can be used in positive or negative directions, right? So, I don't think kids, shouldn't be able to get on the internet or on YouTube or TikTok. I think it's trying to create the space for them to use it to develop in useful ways, in useful ways, developing skills and the ability to think and reason and think critically and all the rest of that, right? Now, to go all the way back to what you started with the development of the child's brain, the easiest way I found to think about this is think about like when a child is born, or when a sperm goes into an egg, the development phase, like the development starts of a child, right, of a human being. Okay, and so that starts to develop, and at whatever amount of months in the womb, the brain or the nervous system will start to develop, right? The nervous system and the brain will start to develop. And you think of it like a tree. Okay, so think about when you plant a tree and it sprouts and it starts to grow up. Okay. So as it's going through that first sprout essentially becomes the trunk of the tree. Okay, so that first sprout becomes the trunk of the tree, and it's the same as in a child, right? That the first sort of sprouts of their nervous system, which is influenced by the genetics, right, the DNA, but also influenced by the epigenetics, the environment, and the bioelectrical fields around, and music can have an influence on their stress hormones and the mother's state, her environment, air quality. Like there's so many factors, okay? Like it's just ridiculous how many factors. But essentially that first sprout is the forming of the trunk, which is the sort of base or the framework or the base structure for the rest of the tree. Yeah. So if we think about it in this sort of analogy or in this way, once that trunk has sort of formed, it's very difficult to change it. If I don't know if you've ever seen a tree that's sort of grown around something, or grown around, like it'll warp itself and grow. But once that trunk sort of formed, you're not really changing that structure. Okay. And that's like the brain. So yes, those first few years is essentially the development of the trunk. And it sets up what branches can come off and how that they can be foliated with different leaves. And that's sort of like, that's why that early development is so important, because it's essentially giving you your base structure that broadly sets the tone or the shape or whatever you want to say, that it sort of sets the stage for the rest of the life. Yeah, it kind of gives you that base to go from. And I think that's a very useful way to think about it. And so, yeah, the early stages are very important, but it's not just that early stage. Like it's before that. It's like what's the mother and the father's states and environments when they have the child? Are you in a high stress or lower stress, or like and it's not about always minimizing stress. You want certain stresses. You want to create those, like physical activity and all this other stuff is a stress. So you want to have some stresses. You don't want to minimize it completely, but chronically, high levels of stress is not going to be a good thing. It actually becomes degrading over time. Chronically high stress. I remember it's interesting because there's some interesting research done like back in the day when they had women and when they fell pregnant in when there was a big war on, and they looked at at a population level, they looked at the predisposition for being obese or not. And they found that if they were born if the women were in famine, like if there was a shortage of food when they conceived and the child was in the womb. Oh my God, I'm butchering this. If they born, I'll get the study and I'll put it. But if they were in famine, it sort of upregulated the likelihood of them being predisposing them to obesity later in life. Like the children would be born and they would try, like their bodies would want to hoard more of the nutrients, so to speak. It would be hard to let go. Whereas if they had sort of abundance, they were less likely to be obese. And it was kind of like an epigenetic switch. And it's not perfect, but like it just showed that there was a bit of a correlation between those things. And I thought that was very interesting. But that's in the womb, right? Like that's before they're even born, so to speak. That's as they're developing in the womb. And then don't forget, there's 9 months of development.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, if we really consider that, that's a huge, huge factor. And I totally understand why it's so important to be really cognizant of those 9 months of pregnancy. So because of those first 5 years are so important, I think forming good, healthy lifestyle habits is vital at those early stages, right? It's sad to see when you see a family and they have a 5-year-old kid and the 5-year-old kid is obviously obese, right? I mean, that's the parents' fault because they're allowing their child to eat freely, eat whatever they want, and they're probably giving it whatever it asks for. And this is where the boundaries comes into place. The parents need to understand that their kids aren't the ones making the decisions, that their children aren't the ones calling the shots. I remember we ate what my parents made. They never asked us, what do you want to eat for breakfast today? Or what do you want for dinner? No, they made what they were making and we ate it. And that was it. You know, there wasn't any negotiations, nothing. Actually, my mom, and by the way, I had dope parents growing up. My mom, my dad, and my stepdad were all like really, really good parents, and I'm really grateful. But anyways, one of the things my mom did, and I was pissed off about it at the time, is that she never allowed us to drink like soda or pop, right? Do you guys call it soda or pop in Australia?
Soft drink.
Soft drink? Okay. So we were allowed to have one a week. It was like on the weekend or something. Like one a week, that was the most we could negotiate for. And we weren't allowed to eat sweets. Like once in a while, my mom would allow us, but she was really, really strict on what we were allowed to eat. And we had to play outside, and we were playing outside constantly, right? So if you are neglecting the nutritional habits of your children and the physical activity of your children, because they're not going to just do those things. Children need to be guided. They need to have boundaries. And I think that's what a lot of parents are sort of missing, because they're trying to just please their child. But that's basically allowing the child to run the show in the family. And I think that's completely the incorrect perspective to have. So if your child is not sufficiently physically active and is obese, that's on you, and consider trying to make some positive changes. And I mean, you know what I'm trying to say without saying it too harshly, but you'll get your shit together. All right.
Yeah. I look, I do. But again, trust me, I'm all for, the individual taking responsibility and all of these things, but it really is also a societal thing as well. Like, society's created the space for all these things to happen. You mentioned about like you ate what your parents would cook. That's because there wasn't really another option, Like if you look back into the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, like even into the 80s probably, there just weren't that many obese people. And part of the reason is like there couldn't be. We just didn't have the abundance of hyperpalatable food, like it was tough to get food. Like there were shortages of all these things. And so you just didn't have the choice. We're spoiled for choice now. That's part of the paradox of choice, right? Like it's just there's too much now. But you make a good point with the kids not being the boss. That really is the case. I've seen this happen firsthand so many times when the kid becomes in control. And honestly, like I think a big part of that is again, back to this, like, if you as a parent don't love yourself, like and loving yourself isn't just like, I love myself, right? It's actually being true to yourself and doing the things that help you to build love for yourself, build trust in yourself, build confidence in yourself. And I think that, like, the whole parenting thing, like, largely is because, there is a percentage of people, and it's a decent percentage of people, who just they don't even have the capacity to, because they don't have that self-control within themselves to do those things. And so much of it is like understanding that, like, if you just optimize for in the moment pleasure and satisfaction, it's probably going to mislead you and lead to bad things. Like, that's essentially drug addiction and all these other stuff. Yeah, like, that's what they all are. That's obesity is that too, like, carbohydrates act as a mild analgesic. They're a painkiller in the body. And so, a lot of people eat their emotions. And that feels good in the moment, but look at what the long-term consequences of that are. It's terrible health. It's terrible body composition. It's an inability to do and move and be the person you want to be in the world, to a degree. Like, it limits that. It really does. But yeah, I think big time it's a societal thing. Like, we can do better as a society. Part of the reason wanting to do this podcast is to talk about these things more, so that we can sort of, because it's a lot on people. Like, I can really empathize with people. Like, it's tough if you're behind the 8 ball and then you start having kids. Like, it's only going to get tougher. Having kids isn't going to make it easier. That's just way more complexity you've added to this. This is partially the reason why I've waited to have children. Like, I didn't rush into it. Like, I've wanted to have kids for a long time, but I've decided not to have them just yet, because I really wanted to get to know myself better. I really wanted to be true to myself without that. Without the complexity of having a child. I noticed things within myself that I wanted to overcome and that I wanted to deal with before bringing a child into this world and potentially, indirectly putting it or directly putting it onto them, if that makes sense. And so that's tough. And some people don't necessarily have the capacity, have the time or the energy to think about or make those decisions, And so it's a tough topic, guy. This is just...
Yeah, it's a good topic. I'm passionate about this topic. I feel like both of us are passionate about any topic, though, really. But
we care a lot. I care, it's hard when you can see different ways. Again, when you have a diverse upbringing and a diverse exposure, you can see that there are many different ways to do things. And some, I think, end up with, better outcomes in some, and others end up with worse outcomes in that regard. But again, that's just based off my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the both of us can sort of give our outside perspective on this matter, because neither of us have children, but we can still talk about things that we have observed, right? And
we've seen children.
That's true. That's a good point. One of my concerns is now, Rubes, is the power that parents have. Because, so let's talk, for example, we could talk about like the topic of hitting your kids is a bit of a delicate topic, right? My mom spanked us growing up, right? So, like, we were spanked. My dad would threaten us so this is what my dad would do. He would take off his belt and he would say, he would tell me to smell the belt. And I didn't really understand fully, but I always thought the more it smells like leather, the more it's going to hurt when he hits me with it. That's what I thought, like, he was sort of getting at. And he would say, Donnie. So he would say it in Polish, but he would say, smell the belt, And I was like, oh, fuck, like, this is like, yeah, it smells like leather. This is going to get pretty serious. And my stepdad came into my life when I was 6 and my brother was 3, right? And when my stepdad came into our lives, he was like our superhero. He was, when he came into our lives, it was like Disneyland all the time. It was fucking dope, right? Not to take away from my real dad, because he's also a really good guy and he was a good father too. But my stepdad was just like Disney World. It was crazy. Where was I? Oh yeah, the power thing, right? So there was certain things that you were allowed to do as a parent before I think you would get in trouble for now. And I kind of concerns me because not to say that I'm for hitting children, but I do feel like some spanking or some sort of fear is necessary. A certain level of fear is necessary because children are feral. They're wild, dude. They're wild animals, and they need to be tamed in certain circumstances so they stop acting out. And I feel like that power that parents used to have to sort of, what's the word? It's not dominate. It's, can't remember what the word is. Right? Discipline. That's it. Yeah. The power that parents used to have to discipline is not the same anymore. And I think that's a little bit concerning. So what are your thoughts in terms of discipline? Like, where do we draw the line?
Well, like it or not, violence is the base, is like, that's the last resort for anything in physical, like in life, right? Like, ideally we use words and we resolve conflicts like that, with, language and communication. But like, if that can't be resolved and you've got two differing opinions, violence is the last resort. This has been the case forever. And I think this is built into existence. I believe that death and, destruction and creation are intrinsically linked. So I'm not advocating that everyone just go and be violent. I think we can supersede violence with communication and conflict resolution and all those different mechanisms. But at the end of the day, if none of those things work, then it does come to violence. Look at any government, right? Governments try and be diplomatic with other governments or, et cetera. But at the end of the day, they've all got armies. And it always falls back to that. If you look at nature, if you look at the animal kingdom, everyone wants to, sort of anthropomorphize, Winnie the Pooh and Tigger the tiger and all these things. And like, go and try and be friendly with a bear in nature. See what happens. Yeah, like it's just a part of reality. And so I'm not against any of these blanket statements like hitting your kids is bad. Context matters with everything. Context is really important. My parents weren't big on the whole physical discipline. And I don't think that was the best it could have been, because I was able to get away with some shit that I should have been disciplined for. And it was only because, like you say, kids are wild, like we are. And that's okay. The whole idea, I think a part of a kid's job is to push the boundaries. I think that's literally what kids are meant to do. And the parents their role is to provide those boundaries initially and to help, but then to ultimately let you go off and be free. But, again, part of that discipline, and you would know, like I'll ask you, part of that discipline, largely it would have been, in your opinion, deserved or not deserved?
Bro, it was definitely deserved. I was asking for it. I was a little dickhead when I was a kid. My mom has so many stories. We would go to the grocery store, right? And as soon as we got out into the parking lot, I would go sprinting around the parking lot. And my mom had the groceries in her hand. And she told me that she would have to run around the parking lot chasing me because she was so afraid that I was going to get hit by a car, right? And I just wanted to kind of start shit, like just freak my mom out. That was basically all I was doing. And my mom has stories of walking home with me in her one arm and the groceries in the other. And I was kicking and screaming because I just wanted to book it and run away. So yeah, I did get spanked for shit like that. And it's really funny because I actually remember blocking some of the spanks my mom would give me, right? Like she would wind up and I'd see it coming and I would block it. And like, I would like taunt her. I'd be like, blocked it. You know what I mean? Like a little dick, right?
Yeah.
And, or so she would hit me and I'm like, oh, it didn't hurt. Oh, it didn't hurt. Just crazy shit would just piss her off even more because my mom didn't she could have fucked us up, but there's a limit.
There's a huge limit disparity. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but with that, right? in the moment, you as a child, you sort of hate that. Like, you just gave some examples where you made the most and made it fun. But like, in the moment, you're like, no, and you're trying to push against that, because essentially what your mom's trying to do is to show you that there are, or get you to see that there are risks that you're not able to comprehend yet. Right? You're not able to comprehend that you running around the car park, you could be hit by a car or anything else. You're not thinking of any of that. You're just thinking about, I just want to have fun. I just want to do this. I just want to do that. You're not thinking of these higher level concepts, or these sort of, you're thinking hyper locally. Like, you're so just focused on that little bit pleasure, like that real local thing, as opposed to being able to zoom out a bit and realize that, like, oh, globally, there's actually these greater risks. And that me running around as a small child, I could easily be hit by a car, or I could be taken, like, there's all these other things that could happen. She's aware of that because she has the capacity to be aware of that. And so she always sort of has to impose this local restriction on you, because you're not able to understand those concepts at a greater level. And to you in the moment, that feels bad, But long term, it actually helps to align you with actually what you would like to do, which is be able to live and exist and persist over time, right? And not be killed by a car or some other thing. And so it's an interesting concept. So you mentioned a funny story about how you would help your mom, try and run away with groceries. So growing up, we didn't have a lot of money, and my mom would save up money for our weekly shop at the supermarket. And what we would do is we'd catch the bus to the supermarket. And then if we had enough money, we would catch a taxi home. And that was a very special occasion. So we would catch a taxi back to the house to deliver the groceries. But most of the time, we'd either be on the bus or be walking back, right? So my little brother's 4 years younger than I am. And so we would go, and he would just literally run amok in the supermarket, because he just wanted everything. And he would try and steal shit, he just, as a baby, I'm talking a year old, he would just grab shit off the shelves while he's in the trolley and just hide it in his nappy, or and not because he's trying to, he just sees, this is what kids do. See thing, looks colorful, shiny, I want it, take it, and I know so many people who have taken that concept throughout life, into their age. We can even play a video of one of them later, actually. It'd be pretty funny. But it's just it's human nature. It's just not even human nature. It's just the nature of a living thing, really, I think. Anyway, so we would, mom would save up the money. We'd go shopping. And so we'd be coming back. And so most of the time we'd catch a bus back, right? And so we'd all have a role to play, because we're buying food for the whole family for the whole week. And there's quite a lot of bags. So I'd be carrying some bags. My mom would be carrying some bags, and my brother would have a bag or two little ones to carry as well. Because there was no other option, right? You can't, there's this many bags and there's only this many people, we all have to take a share. Okay. And my little brother, this is how funny he is, right? He would just fucking drop the bags and keep walking. And we'd be like, Zeb, you have to go and pick those bags up. He just, no. And again, my parents weren't into the hitting thing. So they couldn't get him to do that. Right? Partly because they refused to do the physical discipline. Okay. So he would just get away with it. And, a lot of years went by where he could just get away with those things. And, if you ask him now, it was good. He felt good in the moment, but it led to, certain behaviors that, he's overcome now. But it's taken a lot of work. And if you ask him, he'd be like, yeah, I wish they smacked me and made me do it, because damn, I would have developed that bit of self-control. Okay. So it's a very important thing. But yeah, bro, he was hilarious. He just didn't give a fuck. I'm not joking. He would just drop and he wouldn't even tell us. So sometimes we get home and then and we're like, what? It was a whole thing. But, look, I think, ideally, you don't have to use it, the physical, but it is necessary.
Yeah, and I disagree when people make the argument that, oh, you're sort of inciting violence and that kid is going to grow up to be violent as well. I think you can make that argument if there is physical abuse, that's a whole nother topic. But I mean, I was spanked. Doesn't mean I'm a violent person, and I'm not, and I've never been violent. Actually, I'm scared to fight. I would be scared to fight somebody, right? I could probably defend myself if I had to, but I don't would never want to be in a physical altercation, and I don't seek that. So I don't believe the argument that some discipline or spanking can lead to that. Well, I mean, I'll just talk personally, right? My experience with it. But I can see how physical abuse, and I've heard some crazy, crazy stories of physical abuse, and it is a daily thing where kids come home scared because they just know something bad is going to happen, and it's a day-to-day thing. And the physical abuse isn't discipline, right? It's usually not because the kid did something wrong. It's usually because the parents are pissed off about something else or pissed off at each other, and they're taking it out on the kid. And I just think it just snowballs, and it becomes easier to hit the kid, and it just gets out of control.
Lack of self-control.
Yeah.
Like all these things just come back to lack of self-control and self-awareness, right? Monkey see, monkey do. There's so much physical abuse is just mimetics, right? Like they were abused, or they saw their parent or their family or someone abusing someone else on a regular basis. And then like, we can link this to AI and machine learning, but it's like training data, man. Like you just get exposed to enough of that and you just think that's how you act. That's how you are in the world. And, there's definitely better ways to be. With the whole violence thing, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So I think that like martial arts, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or not Brazilian jiu-jitsu, sorry, just jiu-jitsu in general, martial arts, all of those things are important. I think all kids should be taught that. Like some of the most capable, violently capable people, like people that I know, like who are just could kill anyone whenever they want, kind of thing, with their abilities, are the calmest and kindest people I've ever met. Because there's a confidence, there's a calmness that you get from having capabilities. And oh man, it's a beautiful life when you don't have to live in fear. And a lot of fear is because of lack of ability and lack of knowledge.
I agree. I'm an advocate for martial arts as well. We did martial arts when I was growing up too. I did Taekwondo for a while. And yeah, it does teach you control, discipline, and it also does give you confidence for sure. So
hey,
it's interesting because
one sec, I can share a quick story about the violence, right?
Yeah.
I mentioned that my parents weren't big on the, physically disciplining us with smacking and things. And I grew up in an environment, like essentially thinking like, oh, safe, like there's no real repercussions for my actions to a degree. And but I had a grandfather who did, discipline us, but not always for things that we did, just because he was angry too. Okay. And he would like really get us. Like he had a, chainsaws.
Yeah, like the tool to cut down trees with.
Yeah. So you know how they've got a chain that spins around, that there's a blade that comes out and the chain spins around it. But he would use the blade, right? The big long bar. And if we did something wrong, and we were always doing things wrong, and not necessarily because they were wrong, it was just like, in his opinion, anything we did was wrong in some sense, so this is not a good example of when, discipline being a useful thing. This is an example of it being a little bit extreme, but also useful. It ended up being useful for me. So we would go to his house and we'd have to help him all the time with jobs. And he's a bit of a hoarder. So he just has like cars and like everything, like everywhere. And we'd always have to be moving things or organizing something. And his idea of organizing was like, take all this stuff, move it over here. And then like next week we'd be moving it back. And like, it was just seemed redundant to me as a child. And sometimes we'd fuck around and, we always end up getting in trouble. So it started out with little sticks. Like he'd give us a hit with a stick and he'd call it a switch. And he'd make us get his switch so that he could hit us with it. And then I was like, this is stupid. So I started cottoning on. I'd refuse to get it. And that'd just piss him off even more. And then that sort of, he elevated to this chainsaw blade. And so he'd make us put our hand out. All right. And he'd smack us with it. And I did a similar thing to you where I'd just be like, I wouldn't even show any hurt after a while because I was like, fuck this. I'm not going to give him the pleasure of like letting him know that he hurt me. And so I'd just be like, no emotion. And it got to the point where like he would fucking whack us and I would end up with like bruises down on my arm, like welts and things like all halfway up my arm because of it. An unintended consequence of that though is I have incredibly gnarly hands. Like I have like very thick skin, so to speak. And I've never lost a game of slaps. But okay, so all of that and me growing up, I just didn't have that same association with the physical repercussions, but I also never had to be violent to anyone, right? Because of the environment that I grew up in. It was very protected, very sheltered in that regard. Up until I was 11 years old or 12. And my mum was a teacher and she got transferred from inner city Sydney, like King's Cross, Darlinghurst, to Walgett, which is an Aboriginal community in the northwest of New South Wales. And it's known as being the worst town in Australia at the time. So all, well, even now probably, all the shops in the main street are all barricaded and barred up, and like it's essentially like Mad Max out there to a degree. But I'd never been in a fight, and I was able to be who I was and not really have those physical repercussions. Okay, so I went out there, and it's an Aboriginal community, and I'm a white kid, so I went out there, and I wasn't racist. Like I love. I like people for people. I didn't judge them on the color of their skin or anything else, right? Very accepting upbringing, very holistic in that regard. So I go out there thinking like, it was during this reconciliation time in Australia where the Prime Minister was meant to say sorry and all this. And I was like, I'll say sorry. Like, I'm sorry that these things happen to these people. Like, I've got no hard feelings. So I go out there and my first day at school, I get fucking bashed big time, like badly. And not only that is, not only do I get bashed, but my first day of school, my teacher in year 6, we go into the classroom and then he gets bashed. I think I've shared part of this story before. He gets bashed, right? The kids, year 6 kids, 12-year-old kids, bashed the teacher, right? Put him in hospital. But I'd never been in a fight. And so for me, this was like crazy, scary, and horrible in the moment, right? And I was scared and the rest of it. And this went on for months, right? Where this was just like a regular occurrence. And it got to the point where like I was very, very down. Like I was actually suicidal, right? I couldn't see what's the point in living? What's the point in living if this is how people are going to be to each other? And like, I didn't do anything, like I wasn't racist. I wasn't mean to these kids. They just bashed me because I was white and they could, like that. It's that, their sort of societal frustration getting taken out on me. And so I had this like, dark time where I'm like contemplating those things and I'm sort of hit my rock bottom. And I was like, hold up. You do that, you're letting them dictate the outcome of your life. And you haven't even fought back. And I was against violence, right? Because I'd been brought up in an environment to sort of be against violence and not use violence. Okay. And I was like, no. I better like, instead of giving up on this and like, killing yourself and doing this sort of stuff, I'm going to try and fight back because the worst thing that can happen is I just get bashed again. All right. But at least I know I've tried. And if I try and I still can't, then I'll deal with it then. All right. So I started to try and fight back. And I did not want to. It was my environment. I had to. And I started fighting back, went away, had for Christmas holidays. I didn't win the fights, but I did at least threw some punches and it was a better outcome. Right. And I was starting to get a little bit proud. Like I was like, okay, I can deal with this again. And then went away, Christmas holidays, had a growth spurt, put on like 20 kilos, grew like, 6 inches, came back and fucking really started to get into the fighting, right? Like I was like, fuck this. Like I'm going to make this so no one wants to fuck with me. Okay. Like I'm just going to lose it. And I developed this sort of mechanism, which was like a switch that I would flick. Like I had so much I would build up so much anger and rage within me that I could, and I was scared of fighting. Like I don't want to fight, right? I honestly, and I pretty much sucked at it. But I was so afraid that I actually built up this rage sort of switch that if I flicked it, I wouldn't actually even be present in the fight. It wasn't me. I was overwhelmed with rage that I wasn't even consciously in the fight. So I developed this to the point where like I was a psychopath. And I don't know if I saw this in a movie or if I read it somewhere, but I just remember this thing of like thinking to myself, like, I remember hearing this somewhere that the only person that people in jail are afraid of are psychopaths, right? The unpredictable, the crazies. So I was like, I'm just going to be like that. I'm going to become like that. And I did, right? And I developed this violence. And I shit you not, once I started to act on that, everybody stopped fucking with me. I was able to walk around that town like in the middle of the night, 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I'm like 12 years old, 13 years old. I'm a kid walking around. No one will fuck with me. It was all good. And it was because I lent into that. Now I was forced to do that. And since then, I've never, I've had to use violence since then, but I don't go out trying to choose to do it. But I'm so thankful that I actually developed that. Now that time was incredibly hard for me, right? That was a horrible time. And if you were my parents or someone else was my parents at the time, they'd be like, "Oh, poor you, like you shouldn't have to deal with this. I'm going to take you out of here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." Right? Because they're trying to make sure that I'm okay and I'm happy and I'm all these things. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I'm so thankful that I had that experience, even though it was incredibly tough. But I had that realization very early on in my life. I was so lucky to have that and to go through that hard period. And honestly, I would hate to see, I'd be scared to see the person I would be if I didn't go through that experience. And so what I'm trying to get at is like, not all bad things are bad. Not all good things are good. And trying to optimize and make sure everything's good and okay sometimes is not going to lead to good things.
Man, I love that story. But not the part of but it's basically you overcoming that whole situation. It's just like it's such a dope experience that you turn something so negative and horrible into something good. It's a wild upbringing that you had when you moved to that town, man. Well done, because a lot of people in your position could have gone down a multiple range of paths that are not good. So I think it sounds to me that you have something in you. It's something individualistic, something unique about you that enabled you. I mean, it's your self-awareness, I guess. It's your high level of self-awareness that was able to sort of get you through all of that, make you better, right? So you didn't continue down this violent rage and enragement sort of path that you went down, right?
Yeah. But just one quick thing, sorry to interject, but with that, right? The thing that stopped me was I had to develop that in that environment, right? I was just a product of my environment there. And I was forced to I had to hit my rock bottom to have that realization and to start to act upon that, right? And without that pressure, I would never have done that. That's the key thing. Then the next part is I would have kept going down that path if I stayed in that environment. But I was lucky in the fact that we left that environment and we went to a different environment, back to the city, right? And then I was using some of those skills or, those behaviors that I learned there, that violence, in my new environment, but that wasn't going to get me the outcomes that I actually wanted in that environment. And so I had to learn how to suppress, I had to learn how to breathe and stop myself from doing the behaviors that I'd trained myself to do out there. I had to stop that in this new environment because I realized if I act like this, I'm just going to go to jail. I can't just go around doing all of this because in this environment, in this part of society, that's not acceptable. There's other ways to deal with this, and I should use those higher level ways to deal with this. I should use words, I should use language, I should use my ability to communicate to deal with situations in this environment because, the violence thing isn't that. But I had this weird confidence because I always knew if those things didn't work, I could just resort to the violence. And it sounds fucked up, but it's actually true. And that's what I mean about this learning martial arts and things like that. It gives you that quiet confidence.
Yeah, this was making me think about, and a point that I was going to say earlier is that the things that you do to your kids, they will likely do to their kids in the future. And I don't know if it's statistics that I heard or who I heard talking about it on a podcast, but what I have heard, because I haven't observed this, but what I've heard was abusive parents usually create abusive, like, I mean, if you abuse your kids, they usually or are more likely, I should say, to abuse their own children, right? And it's such a sad thing because it's just this cycle that just continues and continues. And it takes someone, I think, like you to break the cycle. Because based on your story, I think that if you had an abusive upbringing, the person how you are and the Ruben that I know, I don't think that you would be a repeat offender, if that's the right terminology to use. I think that you are a person, an individual that would be able to break that cycle. However, my point is that whatever sort of damage you inflict on your kids, they will very likely inflict the exact same damage on their kids. So in my mind, there's two people at fault here. There is the person who inflicted the damage on their kids fault and the person who is inflicting the damage. I kind of want to say repeat offender, but that's not the right terminology. A repeat offender is someone who continues to do the same
behavior.
Yeah. But, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I would just change. So it's not just if you abuse your kids, it's if your children are exposed to that as a way of life. It's not just if you abuse them, it's if they're exposed to abuse in their environment, right? Like if they just see that it's okay to abuse in that regard, then they have more training data to show that that's a way that you can be in life. Yeah. And it's there's so many dimensions to life. There's so many different ways to live it. There's so many ways to be in this world. And it's being mindful of like everything is training data to us as people. And it's and it's especially when you're a child, because it's developing that trunk, right? So if your trunk gets kinked in a certain direction because you've been abused or you've been exposed to high levels of abuse in your environment, that's going to kink your trunk in a certain direction, and it's going to be tough to change it back, okay? Or to account for that later on. Now, you can account for these things. I believe I am proof of being able to account for these things. So even though you have kinks, it doesn't mean that it's 100% guaranteed that you're going to end up like that. You can account for these things through self-awareness and through self-control, developing self-control. You can retrain yourself to account for that. Like I said, like I developed this rage thing, and when I came back into society, right, I had to learn how to control that. And so that required me to be self-aware enough to know that I even had this thing and that wasn't going to be a good strategy. And so that's why I really think that self-awareness and self-control are such superpowers. I think we could, like all of the parenting stuff could just be solved with like, develop more self-awareness, and self-control. And it all comes down to education. But the hard thing for me is I understand that all this information's out there. Part of it's because, I've been able to find it for me, and I've been able to, I've been curious about this and learn and understand these sorts of concepts. But as a society, what are we doing to make this more common? What are we doing to sort of increase the exposure about these kinds of concepts? And that's my concern, is that I don't think as a society, this is part of the main narrative or the mainstream narrative enough. And that's where like, and honestly, you know me, like every argument or big discussion we've had, like not necessarily you and I, but our other friend have had, is like, he's all about the top down, like it's all the planning people. And I'm always like, no, it's the individual's responsibility. And what I'm realizing now is like, damn, it's both, like big time both. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've heard another thing that I've heard on many podcasts as well is that the educational system now, the way that they are essentially educating children, it is sort of separating them from their parents in a certain way, because information that they learn at school is combative information learning at home. And this sort of causes this sort of separation because the parents are raising them one way, the schools are raising them another way. And there is this hypothesis that this is sort of part of the system, where the system is essentially trying to have this larger divide between parents and children and sort of to mold children into a certain way where the system can then take advantage of. Have you heard this concept before?
Not a lot, but I am aware of it. Have sort of been seeing this more and more, especially with this consent stuff. This happened in Australia with the vaccine related things. Happened in the US with vaccine related things as well. But it's like certain institutions in society are kind of taking or gaining more control over certain things that historically would have been up to the parent to decide and solely the parent to decide. And even now with like the gender stuff and the gender reassignment and things like that. So yeah, I do. I've been seeing that, and I think that's a very dangerous thing. But again, I'm just trying to pin this down, like trying to think of like real practical things for parents, like how can you raise gangster kids? And I think, I don't know if you do want to get, okay, so all right, I'll address your point. Yes, I think that definitely that is a thing, what you just mentioned. And seen it with the vaccine, seen it with this gender reassignment stuff, seen it with this belief thing. But I also think that we've sort of created the space for this to happen, right? Because maybe there hasn't been as much sort of self-awareness and self-control on the parents' behalf and, like involvement in the kid's life, that these sort of institutions or schools or whatever feel as if they need to start taking more control and playing more of a role because the parents aren't. Right. And so like we've created the space for this to happen, if that makes sense.
I have another question, and then we'll get to discussing how parents can raise gangster kids. Why do you, this is something that I've observed. So, or maybe I should ask the question this way. Have you observed that families of lower social economic status have many more children than of those of families with higher social economic status? Have you observed this?
Yes.
And why do you think that is?
I have a theory that it's something to do about sort of, I'm going to say intelligence, but I don't mean it in this sense that might be common, and I don't really know how to articulate it. It's a long conversation to get into, but there's some sort of, seems to be a bit of a correlation between, it's not, maybe not intelligence. There seems to be a correlation between like quality of life quality of life and a down regulation in fertility. Like this is, comfort. Correlation between comfort and a down regulation in fertility, and a correlation between discomfort or adversity or danger and challenge and an upregulation in fertility. And so I've lived in low socioeconomic environments, and I've lived in very high socioeconomic environments. And one thing you do notice is the people in the higher socioeconomic environments typically end up having less kids, partially because of their choices to just have less kids, but also fertility issues. Like I actually currently deal with people who end up having fertility issues because of lifestyle, and it's seeking too much comfort, right? Like obesity and things like that lead to lower fertility rates. And then the low socioeconomic seem to be incredibly fertile, right? Like they can just like, look at a dick and get pregnant, or look at a pussy and put a baby in there, kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. There's a, like you got your Richard Dawkins and your Darwins about, trying to get as many. One good strategy for getting your gene or getting genes to persist over time is to put as many copies of them into the next generation as possible. And it's just kind of like, numbers game. If we put 10 copies in, like turtles might have, 100 turtles, babies, because they've got such a low chance of surviving because of the harshness of their reality, so to speak, right? The turtles end up having lots of eggs, lots of baby turtles hatch, but not lots of baby turtles end up making it to live a long life because of how tough it is to be a little turtle and how easy it is to be, preyed upon and, all of those different things. So I think that does tie into it. Because of that low socioeconomic status, there isn't necessarily that same cushy lifestyle that can sort of, insulate you from the harshness of the real world. And so low socioeconomic end up having more kids because it's just, a numbers game for them, really.
I never considered that before. That's interesting. See, I always associated it to a career standpoint, an educational standpoint, where families of low social economic status usually don't go, well, not always, but in a lot of cases, don't have these career-driven lives. They don't have these educational-driven lives. So they have more time to sort of have kids. Whereas people who are very career-driven and are, they're fucking more around. Yeah,
Just go, what the fuck?
Yeah, but yeah. So my point is just that it's a sort of like a time thing. People of high socioeconomic status are allocating more time to other things, being busy or doing other things.
I think, I don't think you're wrong with that. I think that's also a factor. Like what I'm trying to get at is I don't think specifically any one of those. I think this is like a confluence of factors. So at the high end, the higher socioeconomic choose not to have as many kids because they are more, focused on career or getting shit done or whatever. But they also might understand like the responsibilities that come with that, and they might not want to have those extra responsibilities. Yeah, there's so many different things. But there definitely, to me, seems to be a correlation with socioeconomic status and the amount of kids you have.
So I don't have kids, so I can't really say how to raise gangster kids. I can just talk about what my stepdad did because he was a gangster father. So he was a very, very busy guy. He was a very career-driven guy, but he always made sure to give us all the time in the world. I'm not really sure how he did it. I just remember that he was doing it, and he would get down on the floor with us and play with us. Ask us what we're doing, what we're interested in, invest time into things that we were interested in. Whatever sports we wanted to play, alongside my mom, they would make sure that we got into those sports, and they put many, many boundaries on us, right? They looked after us really well, but they also gave us a lot of opportunities to try many new things, to the point where they kind of got annoyed sometimes because I kind of got the reputation, oh, Daniel doesn't have any follow through. He tries everything. And if he loses interest really quickly in things and he doesn't know how to stick to something for a long enough time to get really, really good at, that was sort of like my reputation. And I mean, sure, that does have its negatives and also benefits as well. But I just remember my parents just being there for us and always being interested in what we were doing, eating family dinners together at the table, asking us what we did that day. But they wanted detailed answers, right? It wasn't just like, oh, I'm good, how are you? It was like, no, what did you do at recess? What did you talk to your friends about? And they would always sort of try and guide us and support us in many of the things that we were discussing at the dinner table. And a lot of times I was getting in trouble because I was very honest with my parents, what I was doing. I mean, I could have been a lot more honest, but I would sometimes give information, I'd go a little bit too far, tell them that, I did something, and they would get a reaction and I would get in trouble for something. But they were just like very, very involved. And it was like an everyday thing, right? But again, it was just the time that they allocated to us, spending time with us. Like I legit remember my stepdad, like I said, getting down on the floor and playing with the toy cars with us. I just think it's as simple as that. I think that's...
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a huge thing. That, like, if you're just going to do one thing, just be interested and be available, if that makes sense. But again, if you're too available, that's also a downside. So the sort of, okay, I just want to hit on what, okay, first thing with what you said is, he was a busy guy, but he gave you all the time in the world. I don't know how he did it. I think I know. He didn't give you all the time in the world. He gave you the perception that he did, right? And that shows you that you don't need to give the kid all the time in the world, but giving them the impression that you do care and that you are there for them gives you that impression. It gives you the impression that he gave you all the time in the world. That kind of makes sense, right? Like he obviously couldn't give you all the time in the world and he couldn't always be there for you, but because he was there for you and he did engage and he did care and he did, like connect with you, it felt as if he gave you all the time in the world. And that's a beautiful thing, right? So the biggest thing I want to sort of get across is it's always a balance with everything. Neither of the extremes are ever good. You give your kid all the time in the world, that's going to end up being real bad. All right. If you're always there to do everything for them, they won't learn to do anything. Okay. Not giving them any time and attention is also going to be really bad. So the trick is finding the balance. All right. And I think that's partly what your stepdad did for you, was give you that balance. Okay. What do you mean?
I think I was spoiled growing up, to be honest. I think
maybe gave you too much time.
Maybe, I think you're right. Maybe it wasn't like all the time in the world, but I got that perception. But I just think that we were given a lot. And I think the only thing that was sort of missing was teaching us how to fight for our own sort of success, right? Like I think that I had the perception that I would always be okay and I'd always be taken care of. And maybe when I was younger, that didn't really give me the fight that I needed to sort of, be successful apart from my parents, because my parents helped me pay for my college and my university education, right? So, which I didn't take for granted. I think initially I did, but overall I didn't, because I started really giving her. But I would say that I was a late bloomer because I had that safety net. I didn't have a fear of the real world at all. So, but however, I see a benefit in that as well, because while I was maturing in my 20s, I was really forming my happiness, right? Becoming a happy person, deciding to be happy. And I focus a lot of time on those sort of things and my relationship with my friends and my family as well. And I think that was a huge benefit to forming the person I am today. And because like I have a shit ton of motivation now, but early on, I did university. I finished university. I did really well, but I just didn't have the carry through motivation. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling. My point is that the benefit of that is that it gave me this sort of time to form healthy habits in me, where I'm not suffering from anxiety, not suffering from depression. I'm sort of a happy-go-lucky person for the most part, and it's because I allocated a lot of time to those things early in my life, right? So I think I'm grateful for that. But sorry, I think I interrupted you.
Well, no, I get what you're saying. You also have to understand, we grew up in a time, because we're that same similar age, right? We grew up in a time where it was this was sort of like, just as all this everyone's equal sort of bullshit was happening, like participation awards, like everyone got an award, everyone's special, you're all special, everyone's special, you all get an award, and I think that can have negative effects. Well, I've seen the negative effects of that, right? So that was part of it, and that also gives you that sort of safety cushion. It's like, well, no matter what I do, I'm special. And it's sort of like, becoming an adult is sort of like realizing, oh, hold up, that's not the case. It is, you have to work hard for these. You have to really want these things. And And it's a good litmus test as to like what you care about to figure out like where you're willing to allocate your time and energy and struggle. But I just want to like tie it all together with like, what can parents actually do, right? And so for me, this is how I think about it, right? Is structured adversity. There has to be structured adversity for your children. You need to be, ideally, the best, like, raising great children really comes down to the kids being what's called anti-fragile. Okay. So what is anti-fragile? Well, anti-fragile are things that gain from disorder, challenge, and chaos, right? The world is such a big, complex, crazy, scary, dangerous, beautiful, wonderful place. You cannot prepare them, but you can't pre-prepare them for, like, you can't account for every single thing that's going to happen in their life. You can't do anything. But what you can do is help them to develop the skills that allow them to thrive in those environments. All right. And that's anti-fragile. So how do you make anti-fragile kids? Okay. Structured adversity. You have to challenge them over time. You've got to put up those guardrails initially to help to sort of, define a general direction with that trunk, right? And then that structured adversity, the love and the care, but too much of that is also bad. You can't do everything for them, but don't do nothing for them. It's finding that balance. And so you want to create a robust kid. There's a good quote. You can't make the world less scary and less dangerous, but you can equip yourself and your children with better tools to deal with that uncertainty and chaos and danger. And I think that really is, so if we could sum it up in a simple way, is like, try to create anti-fragile kids. And that's kids that gain from challenge, gain from disorder, gain from chaos, if that makes sense. That's that's the meta level. And then we can do a couple steps down with actionable strategies, if that helps.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. I love that. Now I'm just trying to think of what some strategies would be. I mean,
boy in the bubble is a good way to start, right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe not everyone's familiar with the boy in the bubble. The boy in the bubble is a story about a parent who doesn't want their kid to ever get sick, or is afraid that their kid's going to get sick and die and all the rest of it. So they build a bubble around the kid, right? So the kid lives in this bubble so that he's never going to get sick. Okay, so they're protecting him from all of the harm, right? But then the kid lives in a bubble. And the craziest thing about living in a bubble where there are no germs and no bacteria or anything is the kid doesn't develop an immune system. So by trying to protect that kid from all of the harms of life, they indirectly harm that child because he doesn't develop the skills, abilities, or even the immune system to be able to live without the bubble. They made him solely dependent on this other thing, right? And it also, like, there's meta levels to this, but what sort of life is living in a bubble? The kid can't participate, can't engage with another person, can't kiss a girl or boy or them, whatever. Can't do any of those other things, all because they never want him to get sick. Right? So I think that's fragile. That's the opposite of anti-fragile.
Okay. Yeah, I'm understanding what you're saying. Have you heard of the term helicopter parenting?
That ties into the exact same concept, right? If you're always there doing everything for your kid doesn't learn how to do those things. And so what I really want to get across, what makes really good parents, is it's not trying to always keep your kids safe and protect them from everything. And it's not like not protecting them from anything. Both of those ends of the spectrum are bad. It's a balance point. And you want to have an elasticity and ability to handle this, a robustness and an anti-fragility to these challenges. So the first thing as a parent need to understand is the world is a dangerous, beautiful, scary, amazing place. See that? It's all of those things. And if you try and cut off all of the harm and all of the danger, you take away all of the beauty and all of the richness that is life, right? You can't have the ups without the downs. You just cannot separate them. And whenever you try to do, you're instantly limiting and constraining, right? Whatever that thing, okay? So you can't change that the world is that way. Can't make the world safer, can't make anything, but you can impart the skills and the abilities upon yourself and your child to be able to handle those things better. And I think that's the real takeaway. And the way you do that is by not trying to keep them safe and not expose them to the harshnesses of life. It's by periodically exposing them to that. It's seeking discomfort. It's challenging them, like progressively challenging them over time. This is how we build muscle. We progressively load resistance and your muscles will build. You adapt to it. So it's the ability, it's sort of, progressively exposing them to the skills that you need to have in life to be able to navigate the vastness of diversity of experience and challenge and everything else that there is in life. So that's like self-awareness, self-control, the ability to make decisions that align with you in your long-term goals, not just short-term, but long-term goals, right? Short-term ones are quite easy because they're so immediate in the moment. It's the long-term ones that we typically struggle to align ourselves with. It's the ability, it's to understand the physicality of your body and understand that developing a certain level of physicality and robustness towards things in physical space is good for you. It's understanding about nutrition and how to make decisions that align with what you want in life. It's all of those things. But yeah, like as a meta concept, structure adversity for your children. Don't try and keep them safe. By keeping them safe, you're doing them a disservice, right? But then on the flip side of that, do not just throw them into the chaos and give them continuous adversity, because most of the time, like the vast majority of the time, it's just going to break them, right? It's the rare case that all of that pressure and chaos creates a diamond.
Yeah, I suppose free range parenting can be allocated to certain situations, not all situations, right? Like if you live in a decent neighborhood in Australia, free range parenting is you'll probably get away with it. It's probably a really good thing. But if you lived in that dangerous area, like you said, free range parenting could be sort of a risk, right? So you'd have to find a different sort of balance. So I think the environmental factor possibly plays a huge role. Because I remember when go ahead.
Yeah, really good point. So if you're, in the affluent suburbs and all this sort of stuff, right? That's like the silver spoon, that's the safety, that's the comfort lifestyle, right? So even more important in those environments, you find ways to structure adversity for your kids. Okay. Now, if you're in an environment that is almost just pure chaos, okay, well, then you need to periodically constrain their exposure to that chaos, or put them, so if you're in a very violent environment like I was, that's okay. So instead of just letting them go and get bashed at school every day, all right, let's go and learn some jujitsu. Let's go and learn some self-defense. Let's go and learn some of these tactics, right? So then you're using that, and then that's increasing your ability or your tool set or your skill set to be able to handle that environment that you do go back into. But essentially, it's like whatever that environment is around you, you have to compensate for the opposite. So like in the comfort environment, you've got to get that structured adversity, because there's just not going to be enough. Like I grew up at other times in my life around very rich kids, right? With nannies and maids and all the rest of it. And we'd be sitting upstairs in their like, the 5th floor of their house. And my mate would yell out like to his nanny, like, mate, bring the lunch up. Like his kid couldn't even cook his own eggs. Because everything was done for him. So it's like, that's also bad. Like that can also be dangerous and also be bad, is you're not developing those skills. So it's, you want to develop, robustness, anti-fragility. And so it's like, I got a way to say it, but I just can't pin it down this second. But it's like your skill set, develop your skills. Okay. Like the more skills, the more tools you have, the better able you are, the better you're going to be able to handle the diversity of life. And if you over optimize in one direction, you're under optimizing in all the other directions.
what do we do about boundaries? So I'll give you an example. You have a 12-year-old girl, right? And she sees her friends, they all have cell phones. I don't even know what age kids get cell phones at these days, but I'm just going to say 12, just for the example. And all of her friends have phones, and her parents are from the mindset that no, you're not old enough to have a phone, and their argument is that it's just access to too many things that we don't want you being exposed to. So the parents' point of view could be that social media, because they've read articles or they've heard of people on podcasts talking about the detriments of social media on depression, on anxiety, and they're trying to sort of alleviate that or eliminate that possibility by not just giving their 12-year-old daughter this complete access to all these certain things. However, she's still sort of getting exposed to it via her friends, because all of her friends have cell phones, but she doesn't feel like she's in on the in group. She's sort of outside because everyone has one, and she doesn't, right? And the other side of that is that you are sort of limiting her to learn all of these things, for example, just access to certain platforms and applications, because there are a lot of good ones, right? And you're sort of limiting her access to all the benefits that having that access does as well, right? So how can a parent provide a balance there? How can a parent sort of provide the access that all of her friends have, but limit all the detriments as well at the same time?
Yeah, there is no blanket statement there, but I also think you might be missing the point I'm trying to make. It's not about limiting it, right? It's equipping the child with the skills and cognitive abilities and the self-discipline to be able to handle all of that. Like, the whole thing that makes life beautiful is that there are downsides. Like, that's what makes anything worthwhile. Like, you can't have happiness without sadness. But there is no such thing as happiness without sadness, right? You can't have all the benefits and not have any of the downsides. Like, it's intrinsically linked, right? So the trick is to equip your child with the skills and the abilities to be able to navigate that space effectively for them and what they want in their life. Now, if you haven't done that as a parent, or your child does not have that ability, then you maybe, periodically increase exposure to that without giving them full access, so to speak. Right. But at the end of the day, if you have, spent the time to be with your child, and you've, developed a good epistemology with them, and you've been, they have it, you've been on yourself about the way you engage and interact in your life, and they haven't, you haven't subconsciously put onto them shitty behaviors that you have or whatever, then you don't need to worry, right? All you can do is equip them with the skills and the abilities, to try and make them anti-fragile so that they're less likely to go down the bad path, so to speak, right? But you can't have the fucking safety rails up all the time, if that makes sense. Like, at some point you got to take the training wheels off and just let them go, guy. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, if you're teaching your kid to, okay, let's just make it real fucking simple. If you're teaching your kid to ride a bike, training wheels are helpful initially, right? Because they don't necessarily have a concept of the bike, etc. So the training wheels can be on there so that they don't just get on and fall off straight away. It gives them some time to get exposure to, like, oh, I'm sitting up, I'm moving, oh, it's this kind of thing, right? Then you don't just leave training wheels on, do you? Because you never want your kid to hurt itself. That's just not a way to live. But then you start to develop, and you take the training wheels off, and then you might put some protective gear on so that when they do fall off, it's not major, and that they can get back up again, and they can try again and try again. And it gets to the point where, at some point you have to accept that with all of life, to live it to its full potential, you have to accept the fact that there are risks, that there are downsides, that there are dangers. And you can't control everything ahead of time. And if you do try and control everything ahead of time, you're almost guaranteeing to make this shit, make it worthless and make it terrible. Like the boy in the bubble, the parents wanting to keep him safe, but he doesn't live a full life. He can't experience the full richness of what life is because he's in a fucking bubble the whole time. And then because he's been in a bubble, the kid's got no fucking immune system, so he can't even get out of the bubble. They've created this fucking horrible hell for him to live in because of fear and because all in the name of keeping him safe. And really what they did is they just created the most fragile person that they could. He couldn't even get out of the bubble because his immune system wouldn't work because it had never been exposed to challenge or adversity.
So I had an initial rebuttal, which was the addictive nature of TikTok. And as you start explaining more and more, you've made me realize something. And I agree with you because I was thinking about this. The addictive nature of TikTok, right? So let's just go back to the 12-year-old girl in that situation, and her friends all have TikTok. She finally gets a cell phone. She gets on TikTok, and she's with like the cool girls that are making TikTok videos, right? But if you teach that girl the skills, she will have the skills necessary to combat those things that the sort of the addictive nature of the TikTok platform. Essentially, she will not be interested in making TikTok videos. She will not be interested to just do that just so she can be with the cool girls, right? She's gonna find interests in other things, and she's not gonna care about being with the cool girls because she's gonna have a higher sense of self-worth.
Right.
So the addictive nature of these platforms are not gonna have the influence on her if she's equipped with the necessary skills to sort of guide her through her life.
It's an antidote to chaos, guy. That's exactly right. What you're really doing is you're rendering it all like TikTok can be whatever it wants. It can try and be as addictive as possible, whatever. But at the end of the day, like if you develop those things within your children and those people, it's an antidote to all that bullshit. It really is. And like the craziest thing about all of this is like when you really start to like live like that and develop that self-awareness and try and seek deeper meaning as opposed to superficial pleasures and the, color and movement. That kind of stuff is you learn how to invert those things and you see them for what they actually really are, right? Like, I don't go on Instagram very often. I use it. I use it for certain things and businesses and stuff like that, right? And to connect with people who aren't in my local area. And so when I go on Instagram and you see certain posts, right? Like I know the, people post certain things and I know them in real life. I'm like, one of my favorite ones is the following. You see a picture of like a bunch of people all at, like a fancy restaurant smiling like, oh my God, so thankful, hashtag like best friends since such and such or best time ever with da-da-da. Like I've been to so many of them where all those people are fucking miserable, like bitching and, infighting with each other that whole time. And then all of a sudden the camera comes out and everyone's like, for the picture, so what you really realize about all of this is when you're busy living your best life and you're enjoying all these things, you don't actually have that much time to take the pictures and or care to share it because you're in the moment and that's enough for you, right? It's typically people that are a little bit devoid of that kind of stuff that have to go onto these platforms to do that kind of shit, And so I think that when you raise kids in that sort of way, like, they'll see through it, man, and they won't be interested in that kind of stuff. And that really is the antidote. Like, if you do a good job raising the kids, like, they're not going to be drawn to the TikToks as much. They're not going to care for that. They're going to want to seek real meaningful stuff. And it just so happens that like social media in that regard is not. It's largely superficial. It's like junk food. It's appealing and gets you hyped up and when you want to eat it. But as soon as you bite it and you chew, there's no lasting satisfaction. It's empty, right? It's got all the calories, but no nourishment. And that's the same as like, social media, and it's not all like that. Okay. So they'll find the meaningful stuff on social media. And that I should preface, like not all social media isn't like that, but largely it is. Like that's the main part, but there is meaning on there and there is nourishment on there. And I think that's what if you raise the kids right, like, with that sort of principle, they'll seek more of that out. I know I've sorted out.
Wow, we actually came to a lot of really good conclusions on this one, Rubes. I think we should wrap it up there, bro. That felt good, man. Seriously, I think I think two idiots talking about parenting who don't have kids. I think we've actually come to a few good conclusions and a few good suggestions for real.
Yeah. And but it honestly comes down to understand, like, having kids isn't meant to be easy, right? It's meant to be a challenge. Embrace the challenge. Embrace the discomfort. Seek it, right? Lean into it. And optimize for longer time horizons, right? Like, yeah, it might be hard in the moment, but by dealing with it in the moment, it's going to lead to it getting easier over time. And we can use an analogy like training. You first start off training, you can't lift fuck all, and it's really hard. The more you do it, the better you get. And it's not that it necessarily gets easier, but your ability to do the work builds over time. And then the things that used to be hard for you now become easy. And I think that's like a meta principle for life. And I think it's a meta principle for parenting, right? Lean into the hardship. Like, you might not want to sit with your kid and read because you're so tired or whatever. Do that then and there. Help to develop those sleep habits with them so that long term, you don't have to worry as much about them having bad sleep or whatever, like help them to make good food choices when they're young. Take the time to struggle feeding them. Well, yeah, look, my other thing is like don't feed your kids shitty stuff, and it will be way easier to get them to eat it. Like, trying to feed your kids fucking mashed up veggies and like blended broccoli and cauliflower and all that bullshit. It's just stupid. You cook a nice piece of steak, sit that in front of a kid, and you don't have to force them to eat it. Those little fuckers will just smash it. You put butter in front of a kid and you just watch them just mash that butter into their face. Like, they know what they want to eat, man. Just stop trying to feed them dumb shit and make your life a lot easier.
All right, guys. Remember, we're just two idiots trying to figure what this shit's all about. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with your friends.
And enemies.
And enemies, yeah.
Peace.
All right, bro. Love you, dude. Peace.
Love you too. Bye.